Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. Don't you agree?
The Cinik Radio Podcast.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cinik Radio Podcast. Here your host, Cinik.
Hey, the facts are Spider-Man belongs in the MCU. Sony was delusional thinking they didn't need Marvel, and now he's back. And we, the fans, are 100% proudly responsible for that.
Igrihe.
As long as DC wants to make dark and gritty movies, they're going to lag behind Marvel in every category.
And Ryan.
Batman vs. Superman is objectively better than Infinity War.
IG, did we just forget Kim?
You guys completely suck.
This is the greatest show of all time.
And this is episode 135, and I'm sure this time, of the Cinik Radio Podcast. And I'm your non-subtitle reading host, Cinik. And joining me, as always, my co-host and three people who always consult their physicians or healthcare professionals before doing this podcast, Igrihe, Ryan, and Kim. And on this week's show, you keep writing in, and we keep forgetting to answer. We're going to do a little bit of listener mail. We also break down the latest offering from Guy Ritchie, The Gentleman. Some geek news headed your way, all this and more, and it starts now. Amy from Long Beach, California wants to know, Ryan, I know Parasite was in your top 5 movies for this past year. How do you feel about the rumored HBO 6-episode season, and should they do it in English for non-readers like Cinik?
I hope they don't, and I hope that rumor's crap, because I mean, I don't know. I guess like everything gets adapted, but like give it like a couple years at least. And yeah, like it's a phenomenal movie, but you should earn it. So non-readers should read. It's a good enough movie that if you don't like to read, it is well worth reading. And in fact, you can actually watch it without the subtitles and get a lot of what's going on because it's just so well shot, so well acted. But no, I hope they don't do it because it's not worth it. Like, it's a great movie as it is, and it doesn't need an American, remake series or other. At least, again, not now. Give it 5-10 years and maybe we can do it. But I don't think it's necessary.
I feel personally attacked, but I'll go with Ryan's judgment on that. Stefan from Raleigh, North Carolina wants to know, IG, you say at the beginning of every show, DC can't continue to compete against Marvel as long as they make gritty movies. Birds of Prey and the new Wonder Woman sequel look a little more bright, a little more colorful, and a little more cheerful. Will that change your outlook on the DC product, and will the show be covering them?
Well, the show will definitely be covering them because it's geek culture and that's stuff we love. And as much as of a Marvel mark as I am, I will still watch every DC movie that comes out. However, these do look to be taking a little bit of a different path. They're probably still going to have some of the grit because they just can't seem to get out of their own way with that. But as we've seen with Aquaman and the last Wonder Woman movie, they have the ability to make better movies. And that being said, if they continue on that path and keep moving upward rather than trying to go back to the things they did with Batman v Superman or Justice League, they're going to dig back down a hole. They've started to come back up. They're starting to become competitive, but they, like Birds of Prey, I think they're trying to lean too hard on something that isn't there to lean on. But with Wonder Woman 1984, really looks like that's something that's got a lot to be said for it. So I'm holding my breath. I'm hoping. I think it's going to be good. I'm not having real high hopes for Birds of Prey. So if it ends up being good, and we'll review it here, if it ends up being good, I'll eat my words happily.
Oh, writing this down.
Yes, in his hat. Kim, Birds of Prey, Black Widow, and Wonder Woman. Which one's going to make the most at the box office?
Probably Wonder Woman. I'm kind of with IG on the whole not being super excited of Birds of Prey. I don't feel like there was enough there. I think that there's a lot of fangirls that like to play Harley Quinn and they like to think they're bad girls or whatever, or that they're slightly psychotic. The actual storyline for me isn't shocking. It's not exciting. And I too hope that I eat my words because I am all about the superhero and the villain universe. So I'm really hoping that one kind of, turns things around for me. Like I said before, I'm still not very excited about the Black Widow thing. I love Scarlett Johansson, but I don't know. I don't feel like that was a character story or an arc that needed to be explored yet. I feel like there were more important characters that could have been brought to the forefront. And I think it was just a meager push to try to put some sort of feminine, like, look what we can do. We're totally all about diversity. Everyone trying to rush to the finish line all at the same time. As a woman, that's fairly obvious and irritating to me, because it should have been there the whole time. And now everyone's just all kind of fighting each other to get to that, that next banger, that next, jackpot that they can score some money off of. But I don't think they're doing it for the right reasons.
And lastly, this isn't an email, but a text, and it must be from one of my ex, because it says, "Dear Cinik, just who in the hell do you think you are?" Well, that's kind of a long story, and we're working on keeping the shows down near 30 minutes. So whatever I've done, rest assured that I'm sorry. That's my default position in life. Hashtag victim of the modern age, and feel free to reach out and we'll talk about it. Just send the restraining order to my lawyer or directly to me, either way. All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes of the show, and that's the new Guy Ritchie movie, The Gentleman, which was surprisingly had a pretty established cast for a Guy Ritchie movie. And it's about a drug pin named Mickey Pearson, and as he looks to retire from the marijuana empire he's built in England, it starts a bit of a gang war. IG, almost immediately, we see Mr. All Right, Matthew McConaughey playing our lead, Mickey, shot and killed directly as the movie started. Were you buying the swerve?
No. Like, all the advertising and stuff that come out for this is all about Matthew McConaughey. They aren't going to kill him in the first couple of minutes and he's gone. That's not a Guy Ritchie movie. They might have a little something or some other things going on, but this really kind of set the tone for a lot of things that were going to happen in the movie just repeatedly. Almost too much, but not quite. I didn't buy it. I didn't buy the swerve at all. I knew that we were going to back up quite a ways right from then.
The movie, much like every other Guy Ritchie movie that we've seen, has been set in the UK, and the star-studded cast all attempted accents except for McConaughey. What are your thoughts on his performance as Mickey in the lead, and did he seem slightly out of place with the rest of the cast to you?
I kind of thought going into it that maybe he would feel a little much like an outsider, and to be honest with you, his character in the movie is an outsider. And he even has a dialogue later on in the movie where he almost kind of references it a little bit. He talks about how he's talking to Dry Eye or whomever. And he says, the difference between you and me is I don't like hurting people and you do. A little bit more in depth into dialogue. I'm sure we'll get into some part of it in a little bit, but I think him not doing the accent was probably a blessing to the movie, because I feel like if he did, I probably would have been distracted by it. I don't think it's something he could have pulled off. He was on Jimmy Fallon once upon a time or something like that, and he had attempted to do one, and it was horrid. So I'm really happy he didn't do an accent.
More and more, Ryan, much like Westworld, we're getting this storytelling through the unreliable narrator type deal. And it was the same in this movie, as most of the story was told by this PI named Fletcher, who had an agenda and was digging for details and trying to fill in the blank. Do you enjoy this type of storytelling, and is it conducive to a good time, or does it get a little frustrating sometimes because we never know the true story that we're watching?
It depends on the movie. It depends on what the story is trying to tell. So, you take a movie like The Joker, it's part of the character and part of the story and part of the kind of myth of the Joker is that he is an unreliable narrator. And there's so many iterations of the Joker that you don't want there to be one story. And even, in The Killing Joke, when he says, like, I prefer my history or my past to be multiple choice, like that's something about the character. So I think it works when it fits into the story, fits into the characters. But if it's just used as a way to swerve, or, it's like, okay, well, we'll use an unreliable narrator just to pull off a big twist or an interesting twist or something funny. I think that's cheap, and I'm not a fan of it in that way. So I really think it does have, it's contextual, but I think it really has to be part of the story and character and make it better by having the unreliable narrator.
I mean, most of the time it felt like Fletcher's storytelling was kind of sensationalized, much like a reporter or a private detective would do. But this is kind of unlike anything we've ever seen Hugh Grant in. Was Fletcher so seedy that he was almost charming?
He was actually very charming, and until I saw the cast at the end, I had no idea that was Hugh Grant. It was really well acted and so out of his norm. His vocal mannerisms and everything didn't sound like Hugh Grant. He didn't have his normal things. He had the makeup on to mask what he looked like. And just everything about him was so far away from everything we've ever seen with Hugh Grant, where Normally he's like a manic, compulsive, kind of really edgy, weird, kind of type B personality, standoff in a corner kind of guy. This guy was like very charismatic and sure of himself and deep Cockney accent and everything. And it was really, really well done. And I liked the character quite a bit. Fletcher was number one. He was unreliable and he was sensationalizing the story, but it was fun and it was really well acted. Kudos to Hugh Grant for this. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I really did too. I thought it was probably one of his better performances I've ever seen him in. And that's going to be an ongoing thing where I liked the story. I didn't love the story, but I love the characters. And Hugh Grant definitely kind of upped his game a notch or two. Fletcher's dancing partner through most of this tale of death, violence, and drugs and betrayal was Mickey's right-hand man, Ray, played by the enigma, which is Charlie Hunnam. One of his better performances, too. Were you kind of shocked that he put his career back in Guy Ritchie's hands after the box office disaster that was King Arthur?
I was actually pretty excited to see him make a return, to be honest with you. I feel like if there's anyone in Hollywood that could probably pull off this particular character, I think it was casted perfectly. I think he was great for this role, and I think he did it a service. He is also very charismatic and very clever and cunning. It was interesting to see him do something with so much effort, but do it so effortlessly, if that makes sense. Because I felt like this role was pretty much meant for him. And, a lot has to be said for, staffing and the writing of the actual episode, the movie itself. So I thought it was great.
Well, IG, you were kind of a big Suns fan when it was back on TV on FX. Do you think Hunnam's going to have a decent career? His role choices seem to be a little in question, but this role did seem written directly for him.
Well, when he was in Sons, he was kind of the central character there, and he did an okay job, right? He was a younger actor. He really wasn't known going into it, and so he drew a lot of things based on doing an American accent and looking like a pretty boy. But he fit the right role. He did the right thing. Then he went off and did a few other things, including, like you said, King Arthur. That was absolutely terrible, and that could have been the last we ever saw of him. But then he shows up and does something like this, and I think, like John Travolta when he did Pulp Fiction, this could be the reinvigoration of Charlie Hunnam. This could really show people that he's got some chops if you put him in the right places. And that's what I'm hoping is going to happen, because I didn't honestly know that he had this much in him until we got this movie. Like you said, the story isn't necessarily great, but the actors and the characters themselves, outstanding. And that's what he did in this. He did an outstanding job. I'm totally pleased with him, and I would, in the right roles, love to see him in more things. Now, they kind of try and go back to how he was acting earlier in his career or put him in period pieces where he doesn't belong. I think that's just a mistake. So they need to find more things like this where he's one of the main actors, but not necessarily the front man.
Yeah, he's kind of an ensemble guy. It seems like he's a good piece to the puzzle, but he shouldn't ever really be in the lead, at least so far. I mean, maybe he'll pick something later in his career that he'll stand out and be a bona fide leading man. To this point, though, I don't think he showed it. Kim, I personally thought the storytelling was slick and well crafted. If the plot was a little thin, it would kind of paint by numbers. Having a hugely successful legal business and you're trying to sell it for top dollar, you show your potential buyer all your cards, and he's kind of a villain himself. And then suddenly everything kind of comes undone. With Matthew the obvious culprit in your mind the whole time?
Honestly, I felt like his wife was a little bit out of his league. And I kind of had my eyes pegged on her as maybe being the double agent there. Somebody who was going to try to pull a fast one. Maybe she wanted a bigger piece of the pie or something like that for herself. Who knows? Obviously go watch the movie, draw your own conclusions. It could have gone a number of ways, but you're right. As far as like the actual plot of the movie, was it kind of, there's like a basic structure to some of these successful movies, and it's all about mapping out your acts, your first, your third, yada, yada. So was it a little bit to be expected? Perhaps, but the way that it was carried out, I think, was done really well. And overall, it still left me guessing until about halfway through the movie.
Ryan, Guy Ritchie has a very distinct way of storytelling and character development. How would you describe his style of writing, directing, and where do you think it measures up in comparison to Quentin Tarantino or Christopher Nolan?
It's frenetic and kind of stylized. And, I guess the biggest compliment slash complaint or critique is that he's very much, he has his own style. But the problem is that sometimes the movies are that's all his movies are, is just his own kind of style. Is very, quick cuts, action. I like his fight scenes, but I hate that style of editing where it's just constant, constant cuts, and you can't really, pay attention. I like to be able to take a step back and kind of watch things play out. But at the same time, I like some of the kind of fight choreography. I think it's really interesting and it works well. Where combines some realism, but also some of the flashiness you need for film. It definitely doesn't measure up to Quentin Tarantino. He's like a poor man's Quentin Tarantino. Like the dialogue just doesn't generally stack up. Maybe the action does to an extent, but the dialogue doesn't. And I mean, you compare to Nolan Nolan's on a different level from anybody, almost anyone, in our generation. While maybe Nolan doesn't have like the kind of dialogue of Quentin Tarantino, I think that he's light years ahead of Guy Ritchie.
I think honestly, though, there's a difference in how the dialogue works in each of their things, because Guy Ritchie's thing is going to be quick, punchy dialogue, right? If you think about Snatch and everything that's happened there, it's very quotable and quick, punchy, and this could have, in that vein, been just like Snatch 2. I mean, it's a caper worth big money with a bunch of different players all kind of going after the same kind of stuff. And it's a lot of punchy, quick, quotable dialogue. And that's one of the great things that Guy Ritchie, when he writes the things and is coming with an original story, and which is where he wasn't able to do this with King Arthur because it's not really an original story. That's what he's able to do here again. Just like Snatch, here in The Gentleman, quick, punchy, quotable stuff. Is it as in-depth or as complete as Quentin Tarantino or Nolan's writing? Absolutely not. But that's not his style. That's not what he's going for. So with that, this works. Like, it works really well because he realized where things were right in earlier movies, Snatch in particular. He went back to that setting, back to that type of movie, and basically made something like it again. Normally that would fail terribly, but this works.
Yeah, and Quentin has a way of writing these cool characters. Everybody's cool. Everybody's the coolest guy in the room, where the guys that Guy Ritchie, or the characters that Guy Ritchie writes, are more scary and they're cool, but and the dialogue is cool, but they also look like they would kill you at absolutely any second and take your wallet. And it just makes you wonder, like, how does he identify with these guys so well, and how is he able to come up with so many characters, because they all shared a lot of the same characteristics, but they were all very different in a lot of interesting ways. Like a lost uncle, IG Colin Farrell shows up in this one, and he's a fighting coach turned fixer when it unfortunately wanders headlong into Mickey's world as a bunch of his students rob Mickey's marijuana operation. Could you identify with his good guy doing bad things to protect his adopted family? And was it interesting enough of a character in a setting that you could see him in his own spinoff film?
Oh, yeah, the coach was great, and like the first kids when he was in the sandwich shop, like starting things with him, and then when they realize that he's quote unquote the coach, and all of a sudden getting excited about it and ready to just kind of do whatever he asks. This character was really well done. And again, another character in this movie who lately just hasn't been doing much. Colin Farrell just hasn't had a lot of good success in the recent past. But this is really well done and right up his alley. And I understand that, the accent isn't that far for Colin Farrell to reach. And he's been a physical performer in the past. He's not poorly defined or anything, but he's not really there to show off his muscles. He's really just kind of a coach, and he teaches boys. And I could totally identify with the character that he's just really trying to look out for people. I can't say it again, but great character, not as great a script, not as great a plot, but so well done. And man, if we could get a coach movie with him, digging his poor unfortunate souls out of bad things that they dug him into, even though he gave them the skills to do it, I'd watch that. Absolutely, I'd watch that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a solid character. I really loved him in this. I loved everybody in this. And I think this is a bit of a Guy Ritchie coming out party, because I think that They went and got the big guns. They casted well. The story is probably a step or two above Snatch, if not in its vein. I really thought this was a solid movie. And another really strong cast member was Mickey's wife, who was acted masterfully by Michelle Dockery from Downton Abbey. She talked cool. She was tough. She handled herself well in every situation. Kim, a little bit of a different look than she's known for from her show. Downton
Abbey is just such a wholesome, lovable type of show, where people are emotionally invested into their characters. And there was a lot of uproar when the show ended up being canceled. So seeing her go from this delightful ray of sunshine in Downton Abbey, I don't know what to call her, but, seeing her go from this one role and seeing her being this emotionless badass, who just literally handled all the situations. Like, I don't want to give anything away, but there really wasn't a whole lot that didn't happen to this poor woman during the show, during this movie. And she took it with a grain of salt. There was a murder, a rape attempt, there was frickin' fighting, there was bloodshed, there was, you name it. Everything was thrown at her, but she kept it cool. She kept her composure. And that's what a solid badass woman does, especially when you're a business owner, which I'm not quite sure what's up with that car shop, but yeah, I mean, obviously it's a front for something else.
Well, Kim, we've talked personality types in the context of relationships before. Can two type A personalities like Mickey and Rosalind in the movie coexist and have a successful relationship?
Oh God, no. You can never have two type A personalities. I mean, eventually they're going to bump heads. Absolutely not.
There would have to be some give in private, right? I mean, you could be bullheaded and bold and brash out in the public, but when you're together, if you kind of give in a little bit, possibly?
Possibly. I mean, if you're just talking in general with type A personalities, psychologically speaking, it's not going to happen. It's a chemical disaster for a romance. You see that give, though, with Matt McConaughey's character, where he's like, I'm not emotional about the money. I don't care about the money. It's not about the money. I am pissed off that you messed with my wife. And you kind of see that break a little bit. So for me, for him, for his character, I feel like he was just kind of putting on a front. I don't think he was necessarily that type of individual. And, it does go a little bit back and forth when there's the narrative coming on with Hugh Grant and Charlie Hunnam's characters.
Fletcher
where
and
he's
Ray.
sitting there. Thank you. And he's sitting there and he's explaining to him the possibilities of, and I had to think about it for a second because I'm like, I don't know if this is what's actually happening in the movie or is this just part of this manuscript that he's wanting to sell the idea of, and Charlie Hunnam's character was like, that doesn't sound like him. That doesn't sound like something he would do. He's like, okay, you're right. And then kind of rewinds and then plays out a little bit differently in the scene. And I was like, damn it, they had me going there for a second. So I don't think necessarily that Matthew McConaughey's character was as badass as maybe they wanted us to think, but I think that he played the part really well when he needed to. But I think behind closed doors, he's probably the softer one.
Well, Ryan, Fletcher's main purpose in the story was to get paid, whether it be from selling his story to a movie studio or blackmailing gangsters. Obviously, his overconfidence was his undoing. Is there any situation that you could walk into with mobsters or Chinese gangsters just because you have all the information? I mean, Littlefinger showed that information might be power, but Cersei showed power is power, right?
But I love those kinds of movies because it puts you in a situation that I don't think I'd ever be comfortable in and ever want to be in. And so I can kind of feel that tension and anxiety. And I guess you can kind of fantasize about how you would act in a situation like that. But yeah, no, I don't think that can ever be. It's a certain breed of human that I am not that can be comfortable in a situation like that.
IG, one thing I noticed was the diverse cast of baddies in this movie, from Russian mobsters to Asian gangsters and even an English fight club. Do you think that kept the story fresh and fun, or was it a little bit overcrowded with different groups?
Well, some of the different groups weren't so front and center that they were able to be a part of the story without taking over. Like the Russian mobsters, for example. There were little bit parts in there that made the threat real, but they weren't forefront in the movie. But I think having all the different pieces kind of coming in together and to make one pie, I think it was the perfect amount of pieces. They didn't have an extra piece laying over on the left when they were all done. It really worked out. And I think that what happens is you get a bunch of different things, which means that for most people, you will identify with one of these heroic groups, because there are a bunch of heroic groups. You'll identify with one or the other in one way or another. And that's a hard thing to do. And it really speaks to the character development that happens so quickly in this movie, because the movie, I believe, is under 2 hours, just under, but it's under 2 hours, and it still develops the characters enough to make you feel for them and understand what's going on. So I don't think it took away from it at all to have as many moving parts in this movie as they did.
Kim, in an underworld full of villains, it was Mickey doing a favor for a friend that puts him in the crosshair of the Russian mob. Does this movie prove to you that no good deed goes unpunished? And your thoughts on the movie and your rating?
That's kind of a metaphor for life, though, isn't it? No good deed goes unpunished. It seems like that just happens every freaking time. I really thought that the way that he handled that situation, like he thought about it for a second. He saw those mobsters walking behind the gates. And, you know, there was that moment of hesitation, like, you know, is he just going to drive away, or is he going to, like, he just went through his whole spiel about how 3 and I'm done, 3 and I'm out. You know, he ultimately makes that decision to kind of be the hero of the day. And then he just kind of holds up 4 fingers like, that's 4, you owe me 1, you know? So it's kind of like, I kind of hope I get to see what happens after this. And does he get retributions for this? You know, how is he going to get compensated for kind of saving the day? And woo, way to go, Colin. For me, I really liked the movie. I enjoyed going to see it. It was one of those films where I was captivated the entire time. I thought the cast was amazing and awe-inspiring. I thought that all of them did a great job. And despite the lack of the, you know, an intensive plot, I felt like it was still enough and that the characters pulled it through. I also felt like maybe Charlie Hunnam's character was as good as it was because he was anchored to so many well-vetted professionals that have been doing this for so long. And maybe he may have learned a thing or two about this, and maybe that's why he shines so well. For me, I'm giving it a 7.5. I really liked it. And when it comes out on DVD or for download, I'll definitely watch it again.
I'm right alongside you right there with a 7.5. I would probably give Snatch an 8. This is 7.5. Maybe it's just because I've seen Snatch 8 or 9 times or 800 or 900 times and can just about repeat the movie from heart because, you know, what do I want a caravan with no fucking wheels for? But I digress. This was still a good movie on its own. Yes, it was very much like Snatch, but I could understand everybody in this one. And maybe that's because I've watched Snatch enough times. But it was just also so different. So many other things going on. Matthew McConaughey basically playing Matthew McConaughey as a drug dealer was great. He did a good job. All of the actors beneath him were great. His big bodyguard that he kept carrying around with him named Bunny, I thought was one of the greatest bodyguards of all time. He was quiet, he was big, and he had his winter coat ready to go in and get the pound of flesh. I
thought that was going to be the steak they were cooking at the end.
But I liked this movie quite a bit. I loved the characters more than the movie as a whole, but the characters make me want to watch this again. So, like I said, I'm right there with a 7.5. It's a fun movie, and you should go out and see it, for sure.
The Gentleman was a solid 8 for me. Other than the plot being slightly predictable, I loved the presentation. It was slick, it was cool, it was fun. And any other movie I walk into, I pretty much have an idea what I'm going to see. And for 2 hours, I didn't know, and I enjoyed it. Strong performances from the entire cast. What Guy Ritchie missed in complexity of plot, the characters and their arcs made up for it, and they were well written and they were fun. I love Matthew McConaughey, but I felt like he was kind of there just as a box office draw, and I didn't feel that he belonged totally in the movie. I love Snatch, and this is right up there with that movie. It's just cool. It's a fun little tale that I enjoyed from start to finish. See it with friends, hold somebody's hand, share some popcorn, and escape the world in the news that's basically dominated with end-of-the-world viruses and helicopter crashes. At the end of the day, movies are our last great escape. All right, IG, let's do a little news.
Well, let's do some news indeed. First, let's go to the spring break capital of the United States, and that's right, ladies and gentlemen, that's Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Kim, I'm doing you a favor this week. No Florida.
Oh, woo!
So they're getting ready for spring break down there because you can tell around 4:20 a.m. last week, Officers responded to a 911 call from a witness who was near a TJ Maxx store. I don't know what they're doing at TJ Maxx at 4:20 in the morning. Maybe a new big sale is coming out. I digress. They called that they heard someone yelling for help from a trash truck's compartment because a man who was sleeping in a dumpster got dumped into the truck and was yelling for help. Yeah, that's right. Mark Mancini, 62, of Myrtle Beach, somehow had crawled into the dumpster and decided to take a little nap. I can tell you right now, if you're going to crawl into a dumpster, do it outside of a KFC or a Popeye's chicken or something. Like, don't do it outside of TJ Maxx. You're not going to get anything good to eat.
Are you sure this wasn't in Florida? This really solidly sounds like some shit that would come down here in Florida.
How bad are the mosquitoes there that he has to climb into a dumpster of hot, rotted food? The smells just must have been terrible. But if I can tell you, if I had a nickel for every time this has happened to me, but I've somehow come out okay.
Well, dumpster diving is a real thing, ladies and gentlemen. There are literally YouTube channels just out there, people dumpster diving to rescue things that they may be able to fix, sell, put on eBay, do whatever. And they make significant livings. I don't know if he got in there and got overly excited and fainted or what happened, but yeah, when EMS came, they said that he was complaining of chest pain and hip injuries, and they even did them the favor of taking him to the hospital before pressing charges.
Did they take him there in the dump truck or in the trash truck?
I wouldn't want him in the back of my car, but Ryan, what's the chances that he's going to sue?
Everybody sues for everything, so he'll probably sue. There was something that happened earlier today, and I witnessed something, and I was like, somebody doing something dumb, and then thought they'll probably sue for it. But yeah, people sue for everything, so he'll sue.
It's a very litigious society.
Yes.
I mean, the grandfather dropped his grandchild out of a boat because he was holding it out the window, and they're suing the cruise line.
So now we have a couple of Star Wars stories. First, maybe some issues here. There's been production delays on the Obi-Wan stories out of Disney Plus. Some are suspecting it's part of a bigger problem. The bigger problem being the poor response to the Solo movie and the lukewarm response to The Rise of Skywalker. I personally think that some of the responses are based upon people my age expecting the movies to mature like they have, rather than understanding that they're space westerns for 12-year-olds. But Disney's taken it seriously, and they've already gone through a couple of writers and have moved on to new people for the Obi-Wan stuff, and for new writers for the guy Cassian Andor stories. They've moved on to new ones for that. So there may be some things to this, but you know, it's Hollywood these days, and sometimes they move on to new writers in the middle of projects all the time, right?
At some point, you've got to, like, Lucasfilm has to kind of ask themselves what the hell they're doing, because like they've gone through so many directors. I mean, between Rogue One and Solo and every other week, you know, it's like the game, you know, the double D's were gonna, you know, direct something, and Rian Johnson may or may not be directing, and this, and so, you know, why are they going through people? It's like they've got to. At some point, you have to trust the people that you hand your, you know, that you hand your IP to, and trust that they're going to give you something good. And so, you know, maybe that's part of the problem. You know, it's like A Boy Who Cried Wolf, though. So it's like, how many, you know, maybe it wasn't ready. Maybe it was, but we just don't know, because they're not letting people. They've had so many talented people that they're not giving a chance to do something. And, you know, it's, to an extent, I think there's, you know, you have this kind of, there's the crazy fans that are really upset about, like, that it's more social, it seems more socially aware, and trying to you know, appeal to women and minorities, and there's a segment that, you know, like Ig said, wants it to grow with them. But I kind of disagree with that, only because, like, The Mandalorian's universally loved, and that is right. That is a space western, and, you know, everybody loves it, and it's not trying to be anything more than that. It's mature, but it's still for kids, and it's still funny, and it's fun, and I think it's you know, it's just telling good stories. And I wonder how much of a hand Disney and Lucasfilm had in that. But whatever the case, I just think they need to, like, figure out their own stuff, because it's like they've got all these talented people, and you're not going to get anybody good on any of these projects if it's just, you know, they're on you for anything.
Well, Kim, let me ask you this. Not that we want to see Kathleen Kennedy lose her job like the alt-right does, but do they need to bring in a Kevin Feige or a Jon Favreau to right the ship there?
I really feel like it would bring a little bit of some refreshing essence to, the same old worn out plots. Like Ryan was saying, there's only so much you could do with it. There's an infinite number of things and storylines that these movies could go into, but I feel like they're starting to kind of bottleneck themselves with the actual storytelling. And, I think one of the best things that happened to, say, the Thor series was when Taika Waititi was brought in, and he just completely, took it from Dark World to Ragnarok, and it's like literally night and day. So sometimes you just need a little bit of a refresher, a different perspective of somebody who has a super brilliant and imagination that can come in and just add that new perspective that's needed in order to kind of reconnect with audiences that you maybe lost out on, people that were bummed out with 2 movies ago, so they didn't see the last one. But then you also have to worry about making sure that you're connecting with a newer generation of audience so that you have long-term gains from them as well. It's a series that's been going on for a really long time, so it's tough in order to keep it fresh and interesting, and to still get people to stay captivated.
Well, IG, do you think it's their unwillingness to embrace the source material that was in the books? Maybe if they had a roadmap like the books to go on, maybe the storytelling would be a little bit more unified.
And that's the thing. They really turned around and said all of this extended universe stuff is trash and we're going to throw it away. But there was some really good stuff in the extended universe before they called it Legends. And I think, as you brought up, they would benefit largely from putting a center point of contact that has a wider vision, a Kevin Feige, Jon Favreau, doing something like that so that, Kathleen Kennedy, you can be an executive, but we need a real visionary. We need somebody who has done this, who has been around the block once or twice, actually making stuff. And Kathleen Kennedy's been involved with Lucasfilm for a long time, but she hasn't made anything. She's just been the lead for them. So it's really tough to have her just run this ship that is ready to run without her. And we got proof of that in The Mandalorian, that if you give somebody the reins to run on their own, if they're good enough, they can build something magical. So I think let Kevin Feige stay over and run Marvel because he's doing a fantastic job. Give this over to Jon Favreau. Let him run Star Wars, and we'll get good stuff for years to come. So staying in the Star Wars vein, we have one more story from Star Wars, because next month, all you people that are big fans of the Clone Wars animated series, we're getting the final season. Now it's going to be a shortened season, but we're going to get it. And the news is coming out that this is going to concurrently run alongside Episode 3, which might give us new insight and a new way to watch Revenge of the Sith.
I'm excited and sad that we're going to have to relive Order 66 again. I want to see different takes from it. I want to see different places. I want to see different reactions, because it's probably one of the biggest events in the Star Wars, other than blowing up some Death Stars. The death of all the Jedi, or most of the Jedi, is one of the biggest events in Star Wars lore. So I'm interested to see a little more Darth Maul. I'm interested to see a little more context around Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader. I'm super excited for this. I mean, I was a little bit late to the Clone Wars party, but now I'm all caught up and I'm ready to go.
I saw season 1 when it came out, and then I just didn't watch any of it. And so I've been catching up, and I really, really enjoying it. And it's like, you just wish that that was the Anakin that we got in Revenge of the Sith. And if anything, it'll make make the Revenge of the Sith that much worse if we really get to see the fall of Anakin from a slightly different perspective from the Clone Wars, because I think that character's done so much justice in the Clone Wars. And there's so much context there that we didn't get in Revenge of the Sith. So I'm excited about the season, and I think I'm at the end of season 3 right now and really loving it.
Well, one of the good things about the Clone Wars is when we get to Revenge of the Sith, Anakin is such a respected Jedi and a known name in the universe, but we didn't see him earn any of that, right? We went right from Attack of the Clones, where he was starting to be kind of powerful and understand what he was doing to he's fully established in a general. The Clone Wars gives us everything in between that, which is really what we were missing as Star Wars fans, and it was done well. The animation style, if you're not used to it, at first is a little jarring, but you get past 5 or 6 episodes, and that just blends away. So it's still a fun series to watch. It still holds up. It's doing well. It's on Disney Plus right now, all of the current seasons, and the last season will be available, like I said, in February on Disney Plus. I'm excited for it. I can't wait for it to happen. Last thing I want to talk about today, and I know this really hit us all, and the sports world and the world in general, through the loss of Kobe Bryant in a helicopter crash yesterday. Funny enough, a day after he was passed on the all-time scoring list by LeBron James, we lost one of the greatest sportsmen that has ever existed in any sport in one fell swoop. And he also lost a daughter, and a baseball coach and his daughter and wife were on board the helicopter as well, and a few other people. But really, I mean, he was going to a place where he hosts teams and camps for young girls to become basketball players, to partake in the sport that he loved. You know, this was a guy that represented the United States as part of Team USA and was able to talk to press from different countries because he spoke multiple languages, and he was always generous and giving with his time and his money. And he was just an all-around good guy, and one of, I'll say, easily the top 5 basketball players to have ever played the game. It's a huge loss to lose somebody at only 41 years old who had only retired a couple of years ago and probably had a good coaching or courtside career in his future if he wanted it.
Well, on top of the fact that his daughter was so young and a natural athlete, and all the other kids involved, as much as I yell about space, I'm going to add another to the list. Fuck helicopters. Really. Because when there's nothing to them, and when they crash, everybody on board always seems to go. And we can make it about being rich, and because you can afford to ride in a helicopter, should you? And maybe you should just take a van, but this could have happened alongside the highway too. It's heartbreaking. I have a lot of good memories. I'm not the biggest basketball fan, but I love the stars in the NBA. I love watching them. I'll tune in just to watch one particular player. And Kobe was always one of those guys, the way he played off of Shaq and the way that, he took the reins even after Shaq was gone. Multiple gold medals, multiple championships. And like you said, IG, probably one of the top 5 players of all time, and probably one of the most, next to Jordan, the most competitive player I ever saw on the court. So it's definitely a blow. The NBA is going all out for him, and they're going to induct him into the Hall of Fame early, which is kind of nice. And I even saw that some of the stadiums around football and the Empire State Building and are all honoring his memory. It is a tragic loss. Yeah, I heard they went ahead, like multiple teams, not even just his, but had already gone ahead and retired the number 24 just as a sign of respect for, what he contributed to the sport, to the culture of, trying to help raise children into being better adults, learning how to become stronger individuals, not by hanging out in the streets, but by keeping your mind occupied and, being more diligent with your time and being more productive and being competitive. And, there's a lot to be said for that. And I feel like the world just really kind of lost a true icon, and somebody like that to go so soon is just sad.
And that's it. You made it to the end of another episode of the Cinik Radio podcast. I'm Igrihe, here with Cinik, who you can find at CINIKRADIO.com. Also, we had Ryan, who you can find at thejimwits.com, and Kim, who you can find at KMCArtworks.com. Great artists. Go check out some really cool stuff. We'll be back next week with some new stuff for you, probably some news as well. Send your crazy news stories, any comments, questions, and concerns to us at CINIKRADIO@gmail.com. Find us on the internet at CINIKRADIO.com. Look for us on Facebook at Facebook.com/CINIKRADIO. Find us on Twitter at CINIKRADIO. And find us on Instagram at CINIKRADIO. You can also head over to tpublic.com, search for Cinik, CINIK, and get your own Cinik Radio podcast gear. T-shirts, mugs, cups, stickers, all the cool Cinik Radio podcast stuff you could possibly want. It'd help the show, and we would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for all the love and support. Keep listening, sharing it with your friends, like, listen, and subscribe. And until next time, don't get captured.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at CINIKRADIO.com. Available for download on iTunes.